Welcome to Corralling the Chaos podcast, where we talk publicly about the things you're worried about privately. My name is Angela Leah, and I'm your host. This is the event industry podcast for companies and crew, where we're going to go deep and nothing is off limits. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Corralling the Chaos. Today, I'm super excited about this topic because we talk about it all the time. You all talk about it all the time. And so we figured we should invite somebody to help us really kind of solve this problem once and for all. And that topic is short and long-term improvements you can make in your event production process, right? That word workflow is something that is really central to what you do day in and day out. And really optimizing that workflow is so important because it can make such an impact on that. So today, we have asked Mark Eicher to join us. And prior to becoming a product manager here at LASSO, Mark actually spent over 15 years in live events, leading creative projects and process improvements at a mid-sized company called Ovation, where he worked on a wide breadth of services such as video production, scenic, environmental design, presentation design, print production, opening experiences, and so much more. So as you can imagine, he had his hands in a lot of different pieces of that workflow. And because of that, he's seen and done a little bit of everything in the events industry, worked on big tours from Dolly Parton to Paramore and big corporate events for companies like Salesforce, Walmart, a lot of the big names we all know and love. As LASSO's product manager, though, he is now focused on new product development and refinement. And he's been instrumental in our most recent product launches, including project management and inventory, because again, he has sat in your seat. He understands the challenges of having bad workflows, broken workflows. And so super excited to have you. Thanks so much for joining us, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and your career and kind of what led you to do what you're doing now.
Yeah, well, I fell in love with live production way back in college and kind of realized that was my calling. I love the thrill of it. The show starts at 7 p.m. You got to get everything ready by then. I love that deadline. And so I kind of fell in love with live audio production specifically. And then from there, just the paths of leading one to another to where I am today. I've had as you mentioned, that's quite the intro. Had a lot of random experience. And the way I would describe myself is as a generalist. So I was able to work with all the different experts in various arenas throughout the event production industry. And a lot of my role was taking the different pieces that the experts were working on and getting them all together. And so that's given me a really, I think, valuable perspective that really, when it comes to processes and how do companies operate in different teams with different areas of expertise, how do we all come together? I really, really love putting those things together.
Well, I love how you say generalist, right? Because everyone's like, ooh, specialist. And you're so, I mean, I've had a front row seat to see how you do this. You are so methodical, so process driven. And I think what makes you good is because you do have a really good understanding of the big picture, right? And so that's where that generalist comes in. And a lot of times you have to have the context of understand the full picture to figure out how to put the process of workflow in place versus specialists. Man, they can go really deep in their particular silo, but that doesn't solve the workflow problem, which is more of a generalist, high-level overview. So I think that's a really important characteristic. You know, when you're talking about solving workflow, is having a generalist approach to it with a little bit of a slant of leaning on your specialist to help inform some of those decisions. So I love that you said that. And I've really enjoyed watching you, and I think I've known you for, 8 years maybe, maybe longer, but a long time. And so it's really been fun to kind of watch you kind of apply your methodology when it comes to problem solving. And that's what I really wanted to dive into today, is to just kind of peel back a little bit about your thought process, how you make decisions, how you kind of see things. And so when it comes to companies that are trying to build their workflows and processes, which my hope is all of you out there are continuously doing that, right? I know a lot of times in the last couple of years, people said, we took the time to really get efficient, rethink our workflows, which is great for that period of time. But guess what? Hopefully your business is evolving, and that workflow needs to constantly be evolving and changing, which is frustrating because you feel like the finish line was done. And in reality, there is no finish line when it comes to building software, coming up with workflows and processes. So based on all the things you see, what do you think are some of the costliest mistakes that event companies make when they are setting out to build their workflows and process?
Yeah. So I'd say one of the, maybe this is an opposite, right? But something that I've seen a lot is just continuing to do something because that's the way we've always done it. And that can be a dangerous line of
Kiss
thinking.
of death.
Yes, exactly. Because if you're not willing to evaluate what you're doing and find efficiencies, then you're never going to really accomplish the growth that you want to. And so I always encourage to have an open mind to change. Of course, if something's don't broke, don't fix it, right? But you want to be willing to at least evaluate and kind of create that culture, because that is a culture mind thinking or a cultural mindset of being willing to make the changes. And along with that, developing that culture is don't develop processes in a bubble. So work with your team. Again, me as a generalist, that's where, and I think those types of roles has a lot of empathy. So being able to place yourselves in the experts or the specialists' chairs, if you will, or shoes, and they have answers that you don't have. So most of the things I'm going to talk about are things that I've been guilty of, and learned my lessons from them.
We learn best.
So I try to come up with a process and realize, if I just would have asked the person, hey, what do you think is the best solution here? It would have saved me hours of whatever and the grief of trying to dictate something and without any buy-in. And so that's just a waste of time. And usually the process then changes. So everything you did, you have to kind of redo. So that can be costly, and that can be a big impact depending on what you're trying to tackle. So I definitely involve your team in that, or else there's a lot of bumps down the road. And kind of beyond your team, looking to outside your team to the industry. So I think this is another area where there's a lot of opportunity cost, where, get on LinkedIn forums. There's community groups out there of others in the industry of like, hey, this is the problem I'm having. How have you guys solved it? How have other people solved it? And that's a good starting point that will save you a ton of time and a lot of spinning your wheels. Another big area in terms of cost or mistakes related to cost is not designing for scalability. So you have your process that might work for today, but business, you never want to stay in the same spot, right? You want to be growing. And that means you have a bigger team and different people doing the roles. So you want to develop processes that are clear, not tied to a single person, but maybe tied to a role or multiple roles. And that way, as the team builds, it's easy to inject new people into that process. And so also
that's
along those
such an
lines,
important one, right? Because I think it's a skill set. So many people, they're trying to solve what's right in front of them. And if you find yourself trying to solve for what you see, you are solving the wrong thing, right? And there is a skill set. Some people they're clairvoyant. They have the ability to see around the upcoming 3 corners, right? Not just the corner that's right in front of them. And that can really kind of help with sustainability. And if you are not that person that can see around the corner, invite others into the process because they can see that. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting in the same seat you are now, trying to solve for the problem that's right in front of you every 3 months, right? So solve for the bigger picture, not just what's right in front of you. I think that is such a great call out, because so many companies make that mistake and they burn out, right? Because they don't feel like there's any momentum or progress being made, which is really how burnout happens, because they're just solving for what's right in front of them. And they're right back at it 60 days later.
Yep, exactly. And along with scalability is complexity, right? You want to go with the simplest answer that you can, because as you do scale up, you want to be able to train your new team members, or as people move around. And a lot of times, if it's too complex, that's also goes along with scalability, where you can't really scale into it. So it's kind of definitely a multifaceted approach that you've got to be looking at it and kind of all those little pieces, put them together.
Yeah, so much to think through and consider as you're kind of building workflows. Well, where do you see specifically in the production process, where do you see the ball get dropped most often?
Yeah, I would say it starts with having no single source of truth. So, especially in today's age, and we talk about it a lot, how everybody has multiple software solutions that they're using to manage all parts of the
I think it's like
process.
12.8. And yes, I'm going to
Yeah,
say zero point 0.8. In a survey we did where we said, how many pieces of software does your team work in from RFP to invoice? And they're popping in and out. And yes, there's a zero point 0.8 because we divided by the number of responses. So that's why some people are like, well, how did you get the 0.8? Well, that's how. So let's just round up and call it 13. But if you think about that, your daily job, you're popping in and out of 13 different pieces of software to accomplish, the production of a show. And that's a lot. So I think that's a great one.
yeah, and I'll probably harp on this a couple of times, but again, with the specialists that we have in this industry, which they do amazing work, right? Lighting designers, technical directors, producers, A1, everybody really across the whole game of this getting the show done. My goal has always been, and this is why I kind of came to LASSO, is to enable those people to do their best work as often as they can. So when they are, with this no single source of truth, when they're spending their time looking through multiple pieces of software, where did I put that file? What is the latest piece of information? What are the actual dates of the show? Anytime they're doing that, they are not focusing on doing what they do best, right? Which is producing an event. And so that always drove me nuts. And so that's a big one for me because I want to enable those specialists to do what they do best.
Yeah, that's a great one. Any other balls that, like, when you think about everything that's involved and there's so much behind the scenes that I know people from outside of our industry can just never really appreciate all that goes into the production process. But are there any other bottlenecks or things that not enough companies are addressing in that process?
Well, I'd say another one is, and it's kind of along the lines of no single source of truth, but also in siloed tools. The reason that we have different tools is that, especially in this industry, we're accomplishing a lot of different things for one singular end event, right? So I've seen a lot of, I guess, opportunities missed, but just from the sales process, from that handoff to the production team and pre-production planning, and that handoff to the actual on-site execution team, right? You kind of have those three different main core groups. And there's a really, in each of one of those handoffs, there's a lot of information that needs to be transferred. And, different people within those different areas, they have different mindsets and different skill sets. And so trying to align those handoffs can be really challenging and lead to a lot of costly mistakes too. I mean,
it's like the
sales,
telephone game, right?
it is, right.
Sales tells, operations one thing, operations tells,
Yep.
The people on site something different. And so by the time, that chain of command without one central place to what is the source of truth? What is this word or phrase in the telephone game? Things get lost, changed. These little iterations of things can have big impact.
Yep. And it's not any one group's fault, right? It's just that each one has their own focus of what they are looking at and thinking about, that the other group just that they've got their own, right? And so trying to find that middle ground and identify, hey, what's important to this group that I've got to communicate, and then down the line. And that, again, that's where I've seen a lot of times where stuff has fallen through the cracks, and good process helps with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good intentions with a good process. So how do companies start to fix some of these broken processes?
Yeah. I mean, real practically, I'll just, right at the beginning, I look at what are the same things that we need to do every single project. And it's probably boring things, but that's where you start. Right. And I would sit down with a piece of paper or an Excel spreadsheet, just tab it out of every single time we've got to send a certificate of insurance to the venue. We need to book labor. Okay, how far out do we want to book that labor? Basically, in going through that process, you're going to start to identify, okay, you know what? If this is the same problem in every single show, why don't we just create a quick process to tackle it each time? I bring up the certificate of insurance. Every time a project is awarded, I know I've got to go to accounting and say, hey, can you issue this certificate? That shouldn't be a surprise at any point in the process, because now we've identified it for every single show. So that, any moment that you can identify and then work ahead, that eliminates the panic, right? And we know we love our deadlines in the event industry, right? But, leave the excitement to on-site and getting the show done. But all the stuff that you can eliminate so you can focus on the actual performance, that's what we want to get rid of first. So kind of step by step.
Automating those small, not small details, but automating the repetitive functions.
Yep. And from there, kind of along those lines is information gathering, right? So every single show, you need to have the same amount of, the same information. What's the venue? Who's the client? How big is the audience? Down the line, there's a list of information. And that's where, just as a simple start, is creating a form, whether that is literally a Word document that you're filling out, as simple as that, or if you want a Google form, or depending on, if you've got project management software that might be able to input forms, that you're training your sales staff to input the same information that the operations team needs in order to start executing. And so again, identifying the same steps that you repeat, identifying the same information you need to gather. That's just real simple stuff. But as part of that process is start to look at being consistent in your tools. So again, I've been there where, is the file in Box? Is it in Google Drive? Is it in OneDrive? Is it on my computer? You have to be really strict and start to get everybody working in the same ecosystem. I've definitely seen that where producers have all their own ways of doing things. I like my notes here, I like my files here. But then from the team that's helping, now they have to tailor, their workflow to each individual. That doesn't work. You've got it. How do
you do that, Mark? I have my own opinion, but I would really love to hear yours on, because you've worked with a lot of different types of events, right? And to your point, everybody brings their own set of unique skills, their own unique set of preferences with how they like to work. So if there's an organization out there that's listening that's like, that's really great, but how do I get my people to work in the same system? How do I create that consistency and standardize things? Even though nothing's standard in our industry, how do you standardize things within the company? Like what advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a balancing act, right? You don't want to micromanage, especially as we were saying, we're working with fantastic people in this industry that have amazing skill sets. So the last thing they want is to be micromanaged, and they shouldn't be, right? That's inefficient. But it's a balancing act where you've also got to work with the team. And so we'll probably get into some of this a little bit later, but one of the things is you've got to sell the value of it, right? Like, hey, if you're putting your file in OneDrive and really everyone's working in Box, how many times do you get hit on Teams or Slack or email or text? Hey, do you have that file? Imagine if you just had the file available in Box where everybody else is. No one has to talk to you. It's not a meeting. It's not a phone call. And that probably just saved you and the other person 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however long they were searching before they called you. And so it's you really just have to explain the ROI to each individual. This is how it's going to help you. I know it's a change. I know it's different, but again, that's the culture that you're trying to create of it's okay. Let's be a culture of change. Don't be afraid of it. Balance it, but together we can make things better and make your job easier.
I love that culture of change. I think that's important, really important, right? Because if you're not changing that, it gets stale and stagnant. And with even the way technology is evolving, these companies are evolving, your clients' expectations are evolving, right? And if you just continue to just stay where you are, you will miss out and you do lose. So I love that concept of creating a culture of change. I know being in a fast-growing technology company, I think we talked to you about it too, Mark, when you were considering coming over, is like, hey, things change fast. What we say on Monday, we might hear something that's happening macro or within the industry, and we might pivot by Thursday. And you have to be comfortable with that, which, let's face it, that's the nature of the event world, right? Technology or not, like clients are constantly changing things, right? The event specs in the beginning are very different from the final output, right? And so you have to be comfortable. If you're okay to change along with your client, you've got to be okay to change your internal processes too, right? And constantly iterating on that. So I love that concept of a culture of change. I love that. Well, any advice for event company leaders on how to better manage changing systems? Because it's really hard, right? So if you're going to you talk to us about the workflow and building processes, that's number one, step one, right? Is what should our workflow be? And then the second one is what tools are going to enable us to do that? And then the third is how are we going to get managed through the change management and get people to adopt it? So when it comes into purchasing and bringing in new tools to help these companies work better, smarter, faster, like you said, enabling them to do what they do best. What's some advice you have for some of the event leaders out there on how to manage through that?
Yeah. So kind of I'm going to step back from a more of a higher standpoint or a higher point of view. I think the most important thing that company leaders can do is invest in their team, right? Because these processes are all for the team in order to do better work. And so what I mean by that is find somebody, whether they're on your team already or maybe it's a new hire, but give them the responsibility of process improvements is now in your job description, and you have to be specific about it, because that is to that person, they know they're responsible for it, but also to the rest of the team, they know, hey, this person's leading the charge. And so when they're asking questions, hey, what about this? What about that? I know that's part of their job to make my life better. So I think it's really important as leadership to invest in their team. And also that means if you're going to add that to their job description, you might have to remove something else from the job description to give them space to do that, right? Everybody operates their own way, but that's something to consider is if you're adding responsibility, think about what they can take off so they can actually focus on this. I would say in smaller companies, usually this is an added responsibility to an existing role. And so you just have to be considerate of that to actually give them time to focus on it if you're asking them to do so. But I think investing in your team is kind of the biggest impact you're going to have. Because it's all for them anyways, so that they can do better work and down the line, of course, make more money for the company, right? Like all comes back to bottom line. And a couple ways of doing that too. And so investing in your specific team member is also incentivizing the whole team. So I would recommend considering, a bonus program or some sort of profit sharing or something along those lines of, hey, we're going to work to make these improvements and these efficiencies, and they should have real results in how we're producing our work. And if we all do good work, then we all win. I think that's just a really big impact that company owners and leadership can have on the rest of the team. And, and down the line, right? Everywhere from sales down to in the warehouse, there's efficiencies and improvements being made, and people should, be able to contribute and then reap those rewards.
Yeah. When you talk about that, I've also heard you say this phrase. There's kind of two phrases, perfect is the enemy of great and done is better than perfect. So what do you mean by that?
So the reason, I'll go way back. The reason I got into live sound is because I started playing in the studio and it drove me nuts. I could not get the perfect sound that I wanted. And you could spend hours and hours in Pro Tools trying to mix and get the perfect sound, and I could never do it. That's the perfectionist in me. And I can never finish an actual recording until I found live sound and realized, 7:00, that's the show. You're in an imperfect room with an imperfect sound system with imperfect musicians. That's okay. I know it's imperfect. That's okay. And so what I mean by that is you can spin your wheels forever trying to have the perfect process, when really you just need to get something done, right? And if it's never done, then of course perfection isn't even part of the, you can't even be part of the discussion. So,
and even if it is perfect, it might only be perfect at this moment in time. Mm-hmm. One thing changes, and that perfection is now imperfection, right? So you're chasing something that isn't a real thing, or at least not a long-term real thing. Yep.
And we see that, not to dive too much into, LASSO, but we see that that's product management at its core is done is better than perfect. Well, there is no perfect piece of software out there that will solve all of your problems exactly how you want it solved. That just doesn't exist, but we have to try to solve the best that we can with the resources that we have in our case, for the most customers, right? And, for people developing their processes, that's kind of a similar mindset you have to have, is you want to create the best process that you can with the resources that you have for the people in front of you. And it won't be perfect, but you've got to make those improvements.
Yeah, such great nuggets in here. Well, I want to wrap up with one final question that we ask every guest on the podcast, and that is, what do you hope for our industry?
Yeah, well, as I've mentioned a couple times, I love watching the experts in this field doing what they do best. So my goal and why I came to LASSO was I want to help provide the tools that removes as much noise of the messy process this can be. I want to remove that noise so people can do what they do best most of the time. They'll never reach 100% because work is work. You got to do an expense report from time to time, right? But as much as we can remove all the noise of managing the event, making that flow better so that a lighting designer can be designing the lights most of the time. A TD can be doing his drawings and working with the vendors most of the time. To me, I think there's first very real value for people just who are doing that work, that they can enjoy it more, but that makes the teams more efficient, right? And so when they're more efficient, they can take on more business. When they take on more business, that increases your revenue, increases your profit. And in the end, like, the way that I see that going is the further that the dollar can go, the more that brands will invest in events, right? If you can do a better event for, the same amount of money they might have spent last year, brands are going to continue to invest. And then again, everybody wins in that scenario. And technicians, the experts, everybody makes more money and has a better life doing it. That's a really grand idea, but that's what it is. I think,
love it though. There's that theme again, right? Enabling your people to do their best work.
Yep. Absolutely.
You're not going to have turnover. You're going to have job satisfaction. You're going to have happier clients, happier teams, to your point, healthier bottom line, all those things. And so if we can kind of rally around that idea of how do you invest in areas that enable your team to do their best work? I think that's phenomenal. I don't think that's grandiose. I think that's completely achievable. So I think you've really painted a good picture for people. And what I love about this particular episode is you've given them some really tangible things to think about today and to go back to their management teams and talk through. And there's a lot of actionable items in here. So I appreciate you coming on and talking through this. I always think of you as, a process-driven person because you are so methodical, and you start with solving the problem first. I love how your brain has always worked with what's the problem we're trying to solve, and then let's work backwards in a methodical, fast way to get to the best outcome the fastest. And again, done is better than perfect, right? Like you're always iterating, always changing based on what, again, you or your team might see around the next corner. So I think that's really great insights today, and I appreciate you joining us. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thanks everybody for tuning in. If you like what you hear, don't forget to hit subscribe. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, reach out to us at podcast@lasso.io. Thanks, everybody.